Finally, mga kapatid, patutuloy na rin ang ating inaantabayanan na series sa Revelation. Pero bago ang lahat, kumusta na kayo? Good morning sa ating lahat. Isang pasasalamat sa Panginoon na makapanayam ulit ang bawat isa sa larangan po ng pangangaral ng salita ng Diyos at sa pagsamba sa Kanya. Let me take this opportunity to express my gratitude sa buong simbahan. Alam niyo kung sino kayo na dumamay, umantabay sa aming family sa pinagdaanan namin sa COVID at patuloy pa rin nagre-recover. Yung sacrifices ninyo, yung love ninyo, yung expression ng concern, yung panalangin ninyo, hanggang sa malagpasan namin ito ng tuluyan. We are on our road to recovery, to full recovery. And yet, sa aming kinalalagyan sa kasalukuyan, punong-puno kami ng pasasalamat dahil sa inyong pagpapadama ng inyong pagkalinga. Gusto kong sabihin sa inyong lahat ito. Damang-dama ito. Ipinarating nyo sa amin at naramdaman namin ang inyong pagkalinga. Salamat sa inyo mga kapatid at higit sa lahat, salamat sa Diyos. Ang pagtitipong ito at pakikinig sa isa't isa ay larawan ng ating iisang naisin at kalooban na magpasakop sa Diyos at sumunod sa Kanyang anak. Kaya ngayong umaga, napapanahon na i-highlight natin ang paksa sa at least 3 magkakasunod na Sunday na introduction ng ating new series sa Book of the Revelation with the theme Following the Lamb dito sa 3 Sundays na ito. At bibigyan natin sila ng iba't ibang angle ng presentation, hoping na ma-enjoy natin yung journey natin together dito sa aklat na ito. But this morning, as a quick point of entry, ay basahin po natin at pakinggan at namnamin at i-process ang aklat po ng Revelation chapter 1, verses 1 to 8.
Ang pagbasa ng salita ng Diyos mula sa Pahayag, Kapitulo 1, versikulo 1 hanggang 8. Ito ang paghahayag ng Diyos kay Hesukristo at Kanya namang inihayag kay Juan na alipin niya sa pamamagitan ng anghel. Ang layon ng paghahayag na ito'y ipabatid sa mga alipin ng Diyos ang mga bagay na malapit ng maganap. Ito ang patotoo ni Juan sa mga nakita niya tungkol sa inihayag ng Diyos at pinatunayan ni Hesukristo. Mapalad ang bumabasa ng aklat na ito, ang mga nakikinig sa hulang inihahayag nito at tumutupad sa nasusulat dito, sapagkat ang lahat ng ito'y malapit nang maganap. Buhat kay Juan sa 7 iglesia sa Asya, sumainyo ang pagpapala at kapayapaan mula sa Diyos. Diyos sa kasalukuyan, sa nakaraan, at siyang darating. At mula sa 7 espiritong nasa harap ng kanyang trono. At mula kay Hesukristo, ang tapat na saksi, ang unang nabuhay sa mga patay at hari ng mga hari sa lupa. Iniibig niya tayo at sa kanyang pagkamatay ay pinalaya niya tayo mula sa ating mga kasalanan. Ginawa niya tayong isang aliping maharlika upang maglingkod sa Diyos at kanyang Ama bilang mga saserdote. Kay Hesukristo ang kapurihan at kapangyarihan magpakailanman. Amen. Pakatandaan ninyo, darating siyang nasa mga alapaap, makikita ng lahat, pati ng umulos sa kanyang pagiliran, dahil sa kanya, iiyak ang lahat ng lipi sa lupa. Magkakagayon nga. Amen. Ako ang Alpha at ang Omega, wika ng Panginoong Diyos na makapangyarihan sa lahat. Diyos sa kasalukuyan, sa nakaraan, at siyang darating. Ito ang salita ng Diyos.
Salamat sa Panginoon sa pagkabasa ng unang bahagi ng ating chapter 1 sa Book of Revelation. Although hindi pa ito yung panahon para isa-isahin natin yung mga verses natin sa ating pag-aaral. Pero maganda na every Sunday sa ating introductory points ay masulyapan na ang salita ng Diyos dito sa Book of Revelation. But I challenge the whole church to please join the journey already in reading Revelation 1 to 22. Don't wait sa Sunday na ipipreach yung passage or chapter sa book na ito bago nyo basahin, kundi basahin nyo ito. At ang challenge ko ito lang, isang upuan. Basahin sa Tagalog or English kung saan kayo comfortable. Subukan yung uupuan at basahin ang chapter 1 to 22 ng isang upuan lang. Hanggang sa gusto nyong ulit-ulitin ito at namnamin yung salita ng Panginoon. So ilang mga bagay ang i-highlight natin this morning as we introduce our series. And we begin as a first part sa ating first introduction, a question of relevance. A question of relevance. The Apocalypse of St. John, or the Revelation of John, has always provoked the question of its own relevance. Talagang mula pa noon, yung pagharap sa canonicity ng Scripture, meaning ano yung mga aklat na i-recognize ng hinirang ng Diyos na bahagi ng aklat sa Biblia, nagkaroon na talaga ng ito mismong nature ng Book of Revelation ay nag-provoke na ng maraming kaisipan patungkol sa ano nga ba talaga at paano ito relevant sa panahon nila. Here are some reactions and tendencies related to the question of relevance. Let me ask you a question. What comes to mind when the book of Revelation is mentioned? And here are some words and phrases that are often heard associated with it. The end, the rapture, 7, 4 horsemen, the Antichrist, 666, judgment, vengeance, the second coming, heaven, and so on. Pero ilan ito sa mga prominent responses pag pinag-usapan, anong papasok sa isipan mong una pagka napakinggan mo ang Book of Revelation? But I noticed that some of the most important words in Revelation, such as witness, throne, lamb, do not come to mind as quickly. Yet, they are central to the book itself. Nakita niyo ang irony? Yung mga nauna nating binanggit, yan yung mga unang papasok sa isipan. Pero itong mga central sa book, like witness, throne, and lamb, nasa sideline sila. Which are actually central to the message of the book. And, add to that, these central themes, like witness, throne, and lamb, among others, are being replaced by emotional reactions to the book. Like scary, alarming, confusing, and even dangerous. Revelation barely made it actually into the Christian canon. Pero nung napasama na siya sa canon, the 66 books we have now, then Revelation has been functionally decanonized. So nag-struggle yung book na papasama sa canon, at nung nasa canon na siya, ay nakarating ulit sa attempt na hindi isama sa mga pag-aaral at usapin. And fear and suspicion of Revelation are almost as old as the document itself. In part because, from the beginning, Revelation has been used and abused by people on the fringes of the Christian church and by fanatics. Isang scholar, ganito ang pagkakabanggit niya, no other part of the Bible has provided such a happy hunting ground for all sorts of bizarre and dangerous interpretations. Have you heard of attempts like harmonizing Daniel and Revelation? Of course, magandang pag-usapan yan, pero isa yan sa pangunahing attempt na in order to understand Revelation, ilagay natin sa tabi niya ang Daniel at titingnan natin na pareho ang laman nito o di kaya may pagkakahambing ang laman nito. At may puntos namang na pwedeng silipin dyan. Narinig nyo na yung pag-equate ng Revelation sa current events? Kaya naniniwala ako na sa pag-aaral natin ng Book of Revelation is just timely and on target because of all these attempts and tendencies in exploring the relevance of the book, equating Revelation and current events. Remember yung pagtawid ng Y2K, ng 2000? Niyanig ang buong mundo in the light of what has been perceived as the message of Revelation for the year 2000. But listen to a New Testament specialist in evaluating this. His name is Luke Timothy Johnson. Dr. Johnson writes, and let me quote it, "Few writings in all of literature have been so obsessively read with such generally disastrous results as the book of Revelation, meaning the Apocalypse. Its history of interpretation is largely a story of tragic misinterpretation resulting from a fundamental misapprehension of the work's literary form and purpose. Insofar as its arcane symbols have fed the treasury of prayer and poetry, at sisilipin natin ilang mga examples later, its influence has been benign. More often, these same symbols have nurtured delusionary systems, both private and public, to the destruction of their fashioners and to the discredit of the writing." End quote. Pero mga kapatid, ito magandang balita. Despite these problems and concerns, there have been many admirers of the book of Revelation. Christians and others who have read the book sensitively and creatively, stressing especially its ability to excite imagination in the contemplation and worship of God, or its offer of hope to the oppressed. Think, for example, of two popular hymns, classic ones that we have been singing in the church during worship. Think of the hymn, "Holy, Holy, Holy." This hymn is inspired by the book of Revelation. Think also of the crown hymn with many crowns. Crown him with many crowns. This is also inspired by the same book. Yet, overall, we made Revelation, sabi ng isang New Testament scholar by the name David De Silva, ang sabi niya, we made Revelation one of our religious exploits. Grabe, no? In seeking to apply the text to our time, there has been attempt to exploit the book to fit in everyone's purpose. Sinundan ito ni Michael Gorman, Dr. Michael Gorman, at ang sabi niya, although the rapture is the theological starting point for the Left Behind series and many other popular interpretations of Revelation, there is no rapture in the book of Revelation. Wow! Pag pinagsama mo si De Silva at si Gorman, mga New Testament experts, parang dating, pinipilit nating mag-conform yung revelation ni John sa gusto nating mangyari sa ating kinabukasan. And, of course, this is supposedly narrated at 4:1, di ba? The introduction of the book's central vision. Silipin natin sandali. Okay, titingnan natin yung Revelation chapter 4 verse 1. Pagkatapos kong masaksihan ang mga bagay na ito, nakita ko sa langit ang isang bukas na pinto. At narinig ko ang tinig na parang tunog ng isang trompeta na ang sabi sa akin, umakyat ka rito at ipapakita ko sa iyo kung ano pang mga mangyayari pagkatapos nito. Malimit, ito po ang basihan ng perspective ng rapture. Pero hindi po yan yung ibig sabihin ng talatang ito, kundi that's an introductory portion of the main section of the book, the Revelation. So we affirm, however, that the second coming, the parousia, is part of the book of Revelation. Not rapture, but the parousia is part of the book of Revelation. The rest of the New Testament, the creeds and the historic teachings of the Christian faith. So next, we will unveil these misconceptions further. Our second point is unveiling the myths. First, ito yung unang misconception, that Revelation is about us. Ang panimula ng aklat, niliwanag ni John, sa panimula ng kanyang aklat, niliwanag ni John na sumusulat siya saan? Hindi sa atin, kundi sa 7 churches in Asia Minor. So it's not about us. Not yet. It is rather about the 7 churches in Asia Minor. So John's letter is about them, to be understood by them, and to shape their perception of their everyday realities, not ours, and to motivate a particular response to their circumstances. In other words, we would do well if we approach the book with particular and ancient communities in mind, the 7 churches in Asia Minor. And immersing ourselves in their context will help us to hear realities as they did and help us to see more clearly how John was trying to challenge them and reposition them to a more faithful response to God than their context made room for. And this in turn helps us to hear Revelation's challenge to us in our context more reliably. So that's the first misconception, that Revelation is about us. It is not. Second, that Revelation is about our future. Our future. Generally speaking, the prophets, the early prophets in the early church, exercised their ministry in the first Christian communities, meaning the future of the present communities, not our future. And these prophets were either itinerant or belonged to a specific community. Kinommunicate nila yung message about the risen Christ to the followers of Christ. And so their outlook was different from the Hebrew Scriptures prophets due to the already present victory of God gained through the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so as a Christian prophet, John's goal was not to interpret the Hebrew Scriptures, but to present the message of the risen Christ to the 7 communities of Asia. It's never about our future, but it's about their future beginning with their present realities. And so John's whole prophetic ministry was founded upon the authority and revelation of the Lord Jesus the Messiah and centered around His imminent return. So we ask, was John's prophecy a blueprint for the future? And the resounding answer is no. The prophet was not asked to predict the future, but to address the religious, social, and political problems of the community. At ang starting point, therefore, in seeing the relevance of the book to us is by seeing first its relevance to the first century communities. Meaning, John's prophecy is primarily about their present realities and not about our future. But what realities of their time? Let's look at 2 evidences. First is internal evidence, meaning what we find from the text. An internal evidence, the text of Revelation provides the background. Primarily, this reality pertains to persecution. Whether it is experienced or expected, but also divided allegiance. Ito yung dalawang pangunahing realities nila. persecution, or divided allegiance. For instance, John himself had been exiled to the island of Patmos because of his witnessing to God's Word. Pakinggan niyo po ang Revelation 1:9 sa kapahayagan ni John. Ako ay si Juan, ang inyong kapatid at kasama sa kapighatian at pagtitiis na nararanasan ng mga kabilang sa kanyang kaharian dahil sa pakikipag-isa kay Jesus. Noon, ako'y nasa isla ng Patmos sapagkat ipinangaral ko ang salita ng Diyos at nagpatutuo ako para kay Jesus. The Church of Pergamum, in addition, counted at least one believer who was martyred. May mention pong isang Kristiyanong pinatay alang-alang sa Ebanghelyo ni Kristo, si Antipas, sa chapter 2, verse 13. I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, yet you hold fast my name, and you did not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells. Ganon din naman, the believers of the church of Smyrna were being forewarned. Binigyan ng babala patungkol sa possibility na harapin din nila ang kamatayan katulad ni Antipas. Chapter 2, verse 10. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Now, kung ang persecution ay nasa paligid lang, anong period ng Christian history ang magmi-meet ng criterion sa tinatawag na widespread persecution? Yung ilan ay nagsuggest na yung persecution ng Christians sa pangunguna na hinasik ni Nero Caesar, ni Nero, between 64 to 68, ay isang magandang candidate ito. Pero, this same persecution was localized. Therefore, it did not affect, or it affected only those Christians living in Rome, but not those living in the rest of the empire. But notice that the text is hinting that the persecution expected by John seemed more widespread. So let's proceed to the external evidence. We begin with the internal one. Let's proceed to the external evidence. And the earliest of this comes from Bishop Irenaeus of Lyons, writing around 180, who said that Revelation was beheld by John toward the end of the reign of Domitian, sa kanyang aklat Against Heresies, book number 5. Sa ating pag-aaral, mga kapatid, ito ang tatayuan nating pananaw. Because of this hint of widespread persecution, tatayuan nating pananaw ay towards the end, perhaps, or the influence of the end of Nero's reign, but more so during the time of Domitian, holding to the testimony of Irenaeus. Third misconception, that Revelation is written in mysterious codes. That Revelation is written in mysterious codes. The sole purpose in reading the book is therefore to decode. Kung sinulat ang Revelation sa pamamagitan ng mysterious codes, therefore ang purpose ng aklat, ang purpose ng pagbabasa ng aklat na ito is to decode the cryptic encoded message. However, the book of Revelation is an unveiling, not cryptic encoding or concealing. In other words, the message John directly received from the Lord is an unveiling, not concealing. Basahin po natin. Revelation 1:1-3. Ito ang pahayag ni Jesucristo na ibinigay ng Diyos sa Kanya at Kanyang inihayag kay Juan na alipin niya sa pamamagitan ng anghel na Kanyang sinugo. Ang layunin ng paghahayag na ito'y ipakita sa mga alipin ng Diyos ang mga bagay na malapit ng maganap. Pinatotohanan ni Juan ang lahat ng kanyang nakita. Ito ang kanyang patutuo tungkol sa mensahe ng Diyos at sa katotohanang ipinahayag ni Hesukristo. Pinagpala ang bumabasa ng aklat na ito, ang mga nakikinig sa propesiya nito, at tumutupad sa nasusulat dito. Sapagkat malapit na itong maganap. Mga kapatid, the revelation ang sinabi, and that's loud and clear. Kapahayagan ng mga bagay na malapit ng maganap. Again, the starting point in reading the revelation in the 21st century is to understand its import and impact in or upon the first century. Ito maglilid sa atin sa pangatlong bahagi ng ating message. Asking the right questions. Or perhaps, hearing the right questions. Kaya ang tanong natin ay, ano bang realities? What realities would they understand, the seven churches, John to be interpreting preeminently in light of Jewish scriptures and Jesus' tradition that pervade the book of Revelation? How is John challenging them to respond in light of this God's eye view of their everyday reality? Napahapyawan na natin kanina, persecution, divided allegiance, and so on. So like the early Christian literature, the book of Revelation was written as an intervention in the lives of early Christian communities, meaning Revelation as a political, economic, and ideological critique. And so faithful engagement with the revelation implies the attempt to locate the ways in which it addressed the concerns of its intended audience and called for that audience to respond. Mamaya masisilip natin yan. And so, while many issues concerning the apocalypse remain unresolved, including such basic questions as when, how, and why it is written, most experts and scholars agree on some important points. Dalawa yung i-highlight natin. First, Revelation is grounded in conflict. The letters to the churches in Revelation 2 to 3, chapters 2 to 3, clearly reflect tension with competing Christian prophets. Inaccuse ni John itong mga prophets na ito. Tinawag niyang Nicolaitans, Balaam, and Jezebel. Inaccuse niya sila bilang mga bulaang mga propeta sapagkat pinopromote nila ang pagkain na offered sa idols at may kinalaman sa sexual immorality. Given the biblical association of sexual immorality with idolatry, the charge is likely one of accommodation to prevailing cultic or social practices to which John is opposed. Moreover, there seems to be an apparent conflict with non-Christian Jewish communities emerging in Revelation 2 and 3. So somehow John associates the synagogues of Satan and those who claim to be Jews and are not with the persecution of Christians. The nature of this conflict, therefore, is unclear, but it seems to be prominent in John's eyes. Second, while conflict among Christians and between Christians and non-Christian Jews is prominent in the letters to the churches, the body of the Revelation, the Apocalypse, reflects a larger struggle. Meaning, Revelation characterizes Roman imperial domination and its emperor as violent, exploitative, and blasphemous. In other words, Revelation's images, the beast and the whore, characterize emperor and empire as grand in appearance but full of corruption and death in reality. So corrupt is the imperial system that even the general population, the inhabitants of the earth, faces Revelation's plagues. Apparently, ang condemnation ni John sa imperial society is multidimensional. On the one hand, the empire deals in exploitation and death, using human beings as mere commodities. Kaya nga, yung katuruan na hindi ka makakabili kung wala kang tatak, imperial na tatak, pagpapasakop sa imperial influence or kapangyarihan, power of the time. Kasi ang tingin ng empire ay commodity ang tao. On the other, the empire is blasphemous in that it elicits worship from its subjects. Indeed, worship of the emperor and the imperial city were prominent features of civic life in the late 1st century Asia Minor. That's the very context of the book of Revelation. In addition, cities literally competed for the privilege of hosting shrines and festivals to the emperor and the imperial deities, with significant political and economic benefits at stake. We see this reality, for example, in Revelation 13. The inhabitants of the earth worship the beast voluntarily. Nevertheless, the beast makes war against the saints, and those who do not worship its image are liable to be killed. And so antagonism among Christians and with non-Christian Jews is prominent in Revelation 2 to 3. Sisilipin natin yan later on, but is displaced by conflict with empire in the body of the Revelation. So the former struggles involve how Christians and Jews should relate to their imperial reality. Christian prophets such as the Nicolaitans, Balaam, and Jezebel advocate a relatively accommodational or accommodationist stance toward imperial culture. Nagsuccumb sila sa imperial culture, which John regards as idolatrous. And non-Christian Jewish communities, which were exempt from participating in the imperial cults, likely found it necessary to distinguish themselves from their Christian counterparts, a move John would have regarded as slander or blasphemy. Chapter 2, verse 9. So, Revelation depicts the ultimate conflict as pitting Christians against the empire. The message is about resisting the empire, highlighted in Revelation 13, requiring a radically sectarian mode of discipleship. As the heavenly voice says, and this is the whole message, come out of her. That's the summary point. Kung itong aklat ng Revelation ay political, economic, and ideological critique sa imperial society, then the message to the churches is clear and loud. Come out of her. Let me read it in Revelation 18:4. Come out of her, referring to the whore, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive her plagues. By refusing to worship emperor and empire, Christians certainly marginalize themselves from the larger society and may expose themselves to danger. Following the Lamb presupposes resisting the beast and the whore, kahit sa prospect ng death. Would not John be surprised to know that people would use his apocalypse as a resource 19 centuries after he had written it? After all, John introduced the vision as involving the things which must happen soon. So it's about them, not about us. And he wrapped it up by sharing Jesus' promise. 3 times he said, no less, that I am coming soon. John did not have us in mind when he circulated the Apocalypse. Nor does the Apocalypse speak directly to our 21st century concerns. And so, we have to ask first century questions when we approach the book of Revelation. This will lead us to our final point, a working theme. Yung tatlong major points natin, a question of relevance, disclosing the misconceptions of these attempts, asking or hearing the right questions, prepare us to situating our working theme for our series in the light of the book. And that is the triumph of the Lamb and the vocation or mission or witness of the church. Why such? But we ask the question, why such a working theme? Because how one reads, teaches, and preaches Revelation can have powerful impact on one's own and other people's emotional, spiritual, and even physical and economic well-being. Ultimately, Revelation is not about the Antichrist, but about the living, triumphant Christ. It is not about a rapture out of this world, but about faithful discipleship in this world. And like every other New Testament book, Revelation is about Jesus the Messiah and about following Him in obedience and love. If anyone therefore asks, why read or study Revelation? The unhesitating answer must be to know Christ better and its implication for the life of the church. And so, brothers and sisters, mga kapatid, in our series, we will highlight what the book highlights. And Jesus is portrayed, and how Jesus is portrayed, like the following highlights. First, Jesus is portrayed as the faithful witness who remained true to God despite tribulation. Second, Jesus is portrayed the present one who walks among the communities of His followers, speaking words of comfort and challenge through the Spirit. Third, Jesus is portrayed as the Lamb that was slain and now reigns with God the Creator, sharing in the devotion and worship due God alone. And fourthly, Jesus is portrayed as the coming one who will bring God's purpose to fulfillment and reign with God among the people of God in the new heaven and the new earth. So let's conclude our first part of introducing the book and our series. Let me highlight two passages quickly. First, Revelation 7:13 to 17. Revelation 7:13 to 17. Pakinggan niyo po ang salita ng Panginoon. Tinatanong ako ng isa sa matatandang pinuno, sino ang mga taong nakadamit ng puti? At saan sila nanggaling? Ginoo, kayo po ang nakakaalam, ang sagot ko. At sinabi niya sa akin, sila ang mga nanggaling sa matinding kapighatian. Nilinis nila at pinaputi ang kanilang damit sa dugo ng kordero. Iyan ang dahilan kung bakit sila ay nasa harap ng trono ng Diyos at naglilingkod sa Kanya sa templo araw at gabi. At ang nakaupo sa trono ang siyang kukup-kup sa kanila. Hindi na sila magugutom ni mauuhaw man. Hindi na rin sila mabibilad sa araw ni mapapaso ng anumang matinding init. Sapagkat ang korderong nasa gitna ng trono ang magiging pastol nila. Siya ang gagabay sa kanila sa mga bukal ng tubig na nagbibigay buhay at papahirin ng Diyos ang bawat luha sa kanilang mga mata. Mga kapatid, ano yung vision dito? The vision refers not only to the glory of eternity in the presence of God, but also to the life of Christians in the world here and now. The point of this portrayal is that God's people are safe amid the troubles of this world. That God spreads His tent over His people. That the faithful ones have washed and made white their robes through the blood of the Lamb. And the victors gain their victories by passing through great tribulation, not by detouring around it. They are able to do this only because of what the Lamb has done for them in giving Himself to be slain. And Revelation 7:14, sa binasa natin, refers to surviving the tribulation, not escaping it. And in all that follows in the book, John's readers are never to forget that the victory is a spiritual one. It is a victory over all that can seduce and contaminate. And the threat of physical death is not what makes the Great Tribulation so serious. Rather, the most dangerous thing about it is the serious conflict of loyalties. Nasaan yung loyalty mo? Nasa Lamb? Or nasa enemy? In this conflict, Christians may be in genuine doubt as to where their duties lie, their vocation lie, unless they keep clear on the central affirmation of the faith, and that is that the whole truth of God is to be found in Jesus the Messiah, the triumphant Lamb. Ang second passage ay sa Revelation 20:4-6. Ganito ang sinasabi. At nakakita ako ng mga trono at ang mga nakaupo doon ay binigyan ng karapatang humatol. Nakita ko rin ang mga kaluluwa ng mga taong pinugutan dahil sa pagpapatotoo tungkol kay Jesus at sa pagpapahayag ng salita ng Diyos. Hindi sila sumamba sa halimaw ni sa larawan nito, ni tumanggap man ng tatak ng halimaw sa kanilang noo o kamay. Sila'y nabuhay at nagharing kasama ni Kristo sa loob ng 1,000 taon. Ito ang unang pagbuhay sa mga patay. Ang iba pang mga patay ay hindi nabuhay hanggang hindi natatapos ang 1,000 taon. Pinagpala at ibinukod para sa Diyos ang nakasama sa unang pagkabuhay ng mga patay. Walang kapangyarihan sa kanila ang pangalawang kamatayan. Sa halip, sila'y magiging mga pari ng Diyos at ni Kristo. At maghahari silang kasama niya sa loob ng 1,000 taon. What is the point of these verses? The point is that what seems to be defeat, persecution, or even literal death for the sake of Jesus is really a victory. And those who resist the beast, who oppose its will to power without being corrupted by it, will share in the first resurrection and truly reign with Christ and truly be priests, mga saserdote ng Diyos at ni Kristo. That is, again, a very strong word of encouragement to John's readers to hold fast to the way of Jesus and the way of real power in the resurrecting power of Christ. Essentially, this is what Revelation is about. It is the call to believe that the Jesus who appears in Revelation 1 as the true ruler is the true ruler of the rulers of the earth. Chapter 1, verse 5. And then among the community of saints are the real kings and priests. Verse 6. So despite its commercial and military capacities, Rome cannot promise the eschatological blessings offered by the risen Jesus. Ganon din naman ang hamon ng Revelation sa atin. Contemporary believers ay matapat na pagsusuri faithful discernment. And so in the world of struggle depicted in the Apocalypse, mga kapatid, static discipleship is not an option. Yung walang pag-usad na pagsunod kay Kristo ay hindi nakakatulong. Revelation offers at least 3 modes of address to its audience or audiences, and in turn to us: comfort, exhortation, and admonition. But within its ancient context, in the context of the 7 churches, none of these modes of speech is disembodied. Meaning, comfort is for those who are struggling faithfully, but near their limits. Exhortation applies to those who are grappling with discernment in challenging times. And admonition is for those who are drifting into complacency and security. Mga kapatid, as we conclude, Revelation is therefore also about being true to God and heeding the Spirit by following the Lamb, specifically in 3 areas or 4 areas. First, faithful witness. Second, attentive listening. At susubukan natin yan ulit na balikan next Sunday. Third, worship-infused living. And finally, a missional hope. Again, the emphasis. Our entry point to the book of Revelation is about this single emphasis: following the Lamb. Mga kapatid, see you again next week, and I hope patuloy nating i-reflect itong mga pauna at mga introductory points natin on the book of Revelation with regards to our attempt to follow the Lamb. Purihin po ang Panginoon.